Good evening, all. I'm Rahul Shrivastava. I'm a management consultant by profession and currently work as a project leader with Boston Consulting Group. I'm an IIT Bombay alumnus, graduated way back in 2013. At IIT Bombay, I've devoted a considerable portion of my time to Techfest. I was part of the Techfest core team back in 2011. So it's a great pleasure to be back after 9 years. I am privileged to introduce our guest today, Mr. Victor Cheng. He actually needs no introduction to those who have some knowledge about management consulting profession. To those students who are new to this area, Mr. Victor Cheng is a consulting guru. Consulting inter- is a guru of consulting interview preps, and I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say that every student who aspires to be a management consultant has watched his videos. In my case, multiple times. Victor is a former McKinsey consultant, a Stanford School graduate, a business consultant to Inc. 500 companies, has authored many business books, and serves as an expert on the Wall Street Journal, Time, Forbes, and many more. I don't want to take much time, Victor, but I would like to tell you that I found your case study videos very interesting. Uh, I actually, that was the first thing that I started when I picked up preparation for my interviews and found them very helpful compared to any other consulting prep books. Even today, if someone asks how to start consulting prep, that's the first thing that comes to my mind. And I advise everyone to start watching your videos before start the case interview prep. I sincerely thank you for being a guide and welcome you to today's interview.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be here and looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, the pleasure is ours, Victor, completely ours. So for our first question, Victor, I would like to take you back to your graduation years. How did your interest in consulting field build up? Did you have any role model or personal encounters to fuel this desire?
Yeah, when I didn't really hear about management consulting until right before graduation, maybe a year before. And what I liked was that it involved a lot of two things I liked. One, business. I grew up in a business-oriented family. My grandparents were business owners. My parents were business owners. I was looking at financial statements when I was age 10, believe it or not. So quite familiar with it, yes. I used to wear a t-shirt around middle school that said, "Happiness is positive cash flow." And my instructors just sort of looked at me very oddly, like he's a little bit of a weird one. So business I loved, I was familiar with it, and I loved solving problems. And so there's this thing called management consulting that just happened to combine the two. I'd never heard of it until maybe a year before graduating, and thought, this seems pretty interesting. I thought I would explore it. And many years later, here I am. So.
Great, very interesting. Actually, at the age of 10, I don't even remember what I was doing. Obviously, definitely not looking for positive cash flow.
You had a better 10-year-old childhood than I did. Far more interesting, I'm sure.
So after that, you started working at McKinsey. At McKinsey, you were ranked in the top 10% of consultants worldwide in your batch. Mm-hmm. And you also served as a resume screener and case interviewer for the firm, right? So now when you are on the other side of the interview table, how was your experience when you were trying to screen resumes? What do you think that, people typically miss out in a resume? And especially what do you look for in a resume, right? So both, what are the good things as well as what are some of the pitfalls which people should avoid?
Yeah, it was interesting. I got my job offer and I accepted. And then within a month of starting working at McKinsey, I got all the resumes from my friends who were a year younger than me. So it's very different being on the other side. I had, I think, 600 resumes to go through, and I think I had to pick 20, maybe 30. So the sheer volume is the first thing you notice. It's more digital these days, and there's keyword filters, but there are just so many. So that's the first thing to appreciate is you need some reason, some way to stand out. In terms of the resume specifically, I would say two or three things I think stand out of what people aren't doing that they should do differently. The first is most people think of a resume as a form to list down your career experiences. And it sort of is, but that's not really the function it plays. It really is a sales message. It is an argument as to why they should hire you. And so you have to adapt the resume format to address the quality of your candidacy. So that's the first thing, just mentally a difference. Specifically, most people tend to include their job responsibilities, but not their job achievements or outcomes. So consulting is a very outcome-oriented business. And so they want to know, like, you were there 5 years. Yes, you had lots of responsibilities, but did you actually get anything done that was, especially anything done that was measurable? So if you were involved in sales, you should list how many sales. If you're involved in making things more efficient, you want to do an estimation. This is where the estimation case interview question comes in handy. How much money did you save your company? Try to quantify that. If you achieved an award, for example, and the award is not well known in the country you're trying to apply to, then you want to indicate that how many people applied and how many people won the award, right? Was this award awarded to 90% of participants or 1% of participants? So those things, in trying to convey your exclusivity, your ability to achieve results, all that needs to be in there. And then the last thing is having balance in the resume. You know, if you have come from a very technical institution, such as yourself, and you come from a technical academic field, and you did really, really well, you probably don't need to add a whole lot more, right? So one of the things I see actually a lot from IIT grads is, it's a very technically oriented school. At least the reputation in the United States is, and the ones I've met that have come here have been very technically oriented. Physics and math and so forth. And the level of mathematics needed in consulting is really math that most people learn when they're about 13 years old, right? It's add, subtract, multiply, and divide. And then if you can do percentages, if you can actually understand percentages, you really can run a Global 2000 company with just those 5 skills. So if you have advanced mathematics, I'm going to assume you can probably add, subtract, multiply, and divide, right? That's going to be a given. If you're in the top 1% of the entire country in mathematics, you can probably add, subtract, multiply, and divide. I'm probably not going to challenge you on that. So what I am going to challenge you on is the other half of the skill set, sort of the soft skills. Conflict resolution, being influential with people. Can you sell a product, service, or an idea? Can you work with people that are very, very, very different than you? And oftentimes people have done that, but they don't put it in the resume because it's not typical. But it might be important in your particular candidacy. So really you're selling yourself. You have to consider the breadth of what people are looking for, sort of the EQ and the IQ, the hard skills and the soft skills, and making sure your resume conveys your total picture regardless of the official format of the resume.
Correct. I think that is very interesting to know and a different way to look at it. I think that's not how you typically start looking at a resume, and it's actually very interesting to know that. The next one is, so I have read your book, and your book Case Interview Secrets describe how difficult it is to crack a consulting interview. Mm-hmm. Any particular personality tips that you would like to share with our viewers? I mean, we have covered resume, but on the personality, anything that an interviewer should be aware of during the interview? Any recurrent errors that you have experienced with your interviews in the past?
Yeah, I think, so on the technical portion of the interview, a lot of it is thinking out loud, and most people tend to focus on having the right answer. And as an interviewer, I'm looking much more for the right approach. And by right approach, I mean, is it logical? If you have a very overwhelming problem, like, and this would never be a case interview, but world peace, right? How do you advise the world on having world peace? That is an enormously complex problem, and it's overwhelming. And so part of it is breaking a very large problem into smaller steps and smaller pieces that are easier to digest. And then solving the problem in an orderly, logical fashion. Most people tend to jump right to an answer they think might be correct. And you might be right, you might be wrong. The problem is your process isn't repeatable. And so if you can't use a repeatable process and you merely got lucky, I can't really hire you because I have no confidence if I leave you in front of a client by yourself, you're going to follow a very logical, reasonable process. And you're going to get a good enough answer from our purposes. On the interpersonal side, I think it's useful to really have an interpersonal connection with your interviewer. Most people think of the case interview as some kind of test to get a job offer at a top firm, which it is. But what a lot of people don't tend to appreciate is that it's really a simulation of a day at work in consulting. So right now we are on Zoom. If you're going to do a case interview right now in most parts of the world, it'll be on Zoom. And it's not because of the pandemic. It's because right now, BCG, McKinsey, and Bain consultants are talking to their clients via Zoom, right? So we're using the same medium that you would use on the job. You're being asked the same kinds of questions in the case interview that a client would ask you on the job. And the kind of interpersonal interactions you're having with your interviewer are, guess what? Very similar to the kinds of interpersonal interactions you have with your client. So treating the interviewer as a client is a very useful mindset shift. And then if you get stuck, what should I do? Well, what would you do if you're talking to a client? What would be useful for the client? And that usually answers most questions in terms of what to do next.
Correct. So think of the interviewer as a client, and you are sort of having a discussion with the client rather than giving an interview. I think
absolutely,
interesting.
Absolutely.
You have expressed your views on leadership, and you have even consulted a lot of fast-growing small businesses. What insights do you have for our listeners who are striving towards entrepreneurship, keeping in mind the current pandemic situation?
Yeah, all right. I think it's a fascinating time from a entrepreneurship and macroeconomic perspective. It is a horrible time from a humanitarian perspective. And so I think both are quite true. And I hold sort of both in my mind at the same time. And the reason it's very interesting from an entrepreneurship perspective is because the market, by markets, I mean consumer markets, industrial markets, not stock market, but just the market demand for various products and services is in an enormous transition period and change. And a lot of new opportunities emerge in a changing economy, and we're definitely in a changing economy. And they are usually massively overshadowed by the negative changes, negative in quotes, of what's going on. So the news reports what's bad that's happening, companies shrinking, stores closing, layoffs occurring, and they don't report what's emerging and exciting because it's not obvious what's emerging and exciting. So as an entrepreneur, it's a fascinating time to study changes in market demand. So from your home, there are a lot of changes you can observe, right? One thing you can do is you can go look at stock market prices of individual companies. Which companies' stock prices have gone up in the last 6 months? Okay, why? Why have those ones in particular gone up? What does that imply about the customer demand? Go figure out what's happening with customers. Look at your friends. What are they still spending money on? What are they started spending more money on? I spend more money on Zoom, right? Because there's no other way to talk. I'm on my phone a lot more than I used to be. I've stopped spending money on airplane tickets, right? I canceled a year's worth of airplane flights. So if you just look at your own spending pattern, your family and your friends' spending patterns, there's a big insight into where's the money going now. Right? And so that's what I would encourage all entrepreneurs and consultants to do is, we're all impacted by markets and customer demand and supply. And right now there's so many changes in demand. And to be good as a consultant, to be good as a future entrepreneur, you really have to be accustomed to tracking and noticing those changes in demand so you can position your client or your own company slightly ahead of that demand change. And so this is a fascinating time to do that. A year ago, very difficult. It's too steady, it's too incremental. Now every market has forces at work, lots of changes, every region, every country, every part of the economy. So there's no shortage of things to notice if you pay attention.
Correct. Completely agree. Despite being a positive or a negative change, every change brings about an opportunity that you can grab onto. Agree to that. And I think I can just not directly relate to the airplane point, but I ended up canceling my credit card, which was giving airline points. So again, some personal change, right? So we have read in a lot of places that you have successfully passed 60 out of 61 case interviews that you give on campus. From my experience, I believe it's an amazing feat. Many people consider you as their role model, but this journey must have had its ups and downs, right? Professional success does impact emotional well-being as well. What is your take on that issue?
Yeah, I think it's it's useful to have very broad goals, right? So if you have a goal that you want to be a McKinsey partner, that's a very, very, very narrow goal, right? If your goal is to be intellectually challenged, to contribute to your community, to be financially successful, there's a million ways you can do that, right? So first of all, I've encouraged people to have broad goals that have many possible options to achieve them. That gives you more emotional resilience in life, because if one avenue doesn't quite work or one avenue isn't available right now, some options aren't available anymore, you can adapt and be flexible. That's the first thought. And the second is to be open-minded and consider market feedback. It's quite ironic that I went into consulting, and it's quite very ironic to myself that I'm known as, this consulting expert. I really wanted to be an investment banker. That was my dream since, I studied cash flow at 10 years of age. At 13 years of age, I did summer camp on Wall Street. I visited all the major banks. I talked to equity analysts, corporate investment bankers, day traders, and have been studying the financial markets really before age 10. And I was like, I've been thinking about Wall Street for so long. I went to network to make contacts the year before I applied, and I couldn't get a single interview. Morgan Stanley wouldn't interview, Goldman Sachs wouldn't interview me, Lehman Brothers, now out of business, nobody would interview me, right? And I was just so disappointed, but I took the feedback. I said, for some reason, they just don't see me as an investment banker, even though I thought I would be a great one, and I was so interested for so long. Well, what else can I do? There's this consulting thing. I never really heard of it. A lot of smart people are in it. You can kind of learn a lot. It is business, so I do like that part. It's more on the operational side with a little bit of finance. Okay, maybe I'll give it a try, right? And I'm so grateful Goldman Sachs rejected me. Really, really grateful. They knew something about me in terms of the fit. And in hindsight, I don't think I would have enjoyed working there, right? It's just a very different kind of job. And I love consulting so much. So I'm grateful for what seemed like a very harsh rejection at the time. But there was a market feedback message that I was open to. And so I would encourage everyone to be open to the feedback. It's more important to have a good fitting career than quote unquote a good career, right? If it's great, if it's a good profession in general, that's useful. But if it's not a good match for you, then be open-minded to other options. And so I'm probably many people see me as being very pro-consulting. I'm actually counsel a lot of people away from consulting if it's not a good fit. And I think there's a lot of pressure, especially in elite institutions. Everyone is doing it. It must be the right thing to do. And it might be right for a lot of people. But you really do have to ask, is it a good fit for you? And if it's not, consider other options or pursue multiple options in parallel. So something along those lines, I think, would be very helpful.
Correct. I can personally relate to that. I think just a follow-up on that question. So you got into McKinsey, and it was, again, a very successful start to a career. Typically, a lot of people would believe that's a very good start to the career. When did you actually, during your tenure at McKinsey, take a call that, you want to move out, start something of your own, or, you need to start doing this in a different way?
Yeah, I would say probably about a year after the first year. This happens a lot at these firms. You go in, and even before you start, you think about quitting and when you would quit and why. And for me, I was there quite a while ago, and in parallel, there was this thing called the internet.com boom that emerged right when I started at McKinsey. It actually started in many ways on the Stanford campus, literally down the street from where I lived. I didn't realize its sort of commercial implications at the time. But about a year later, I saw Amazon started, eBay started, all these great companies. And I really wanted to get involved in that. And so I started thinking about a year after starting. And then it took me another year and a half before I actually left.
Okay. Again, so I think lots of hard work. And again, with hard work, a lot of time your efforts are not always appreciated. Right. So with your books, or be it your interview clippings, you might have received dissatisfaction, disapproval, some negative comments. How do you typically handle such criticism? And in your view, is criticism good? Is it something helpful?
Yeah. So criticism, it can be mixed, right? So you want to try to separate the criticism that is constructive and useful versus criticism that's really just intended to be mean and to put you down. And in today's world with social media, there's an awful lot of criticism in that second category of just trying to be mean or trying to make you feel worse or trying to make themselves feel better by making you feel worse. Right? So it's important to not take it all as is, but some of the feedback is quite useful. Right? So what you want to do is you want to separate the tone and the energy, the emotional energy of the criticism, and to see, okay, well, what is their point, their underlying concern? Is it valid? And do they have a suggestion for a concrete action to take to address their concern, right? So, Rahul, if you're giving me feedback and you say, hey, Victor, I can't hear you. Can you turn up the volume on your microphone? I say, okay, is he being mean to me? Like, no, it doesn't seem like, right? Such a nice gentleman here. Does he have a point? Like, well, I guess thousands of people can't hear me. That would be a problem for both you and for me. And you gave me a specific thing I could do to address the issue. Then I'm going to consider it. And if it makes sense to me, I'm going to go do it, right? So feedback that is sort of constructive, action-oriented with something specific and concrete to do can be very useful. So, I've had a lot over the years. I would say a lot more in the first year or two. I got a lot of criticism in the first 2 years, almost none today. And I haven't changed in that time. What has changed is, I would say, credibility. Everything I say today, I said back then. The difference is now there's tens of thousands of more people who've gotten jobs because they listened to what I said 10 years ago, and that credibility has changed, and so a lot of the personal criticism has gone away.
Correct. Absolutely agree. So yeah, I've been featured as a business expert in various magazines. We talked about entrepreneurs, but in general, for established business, what strategies or tip do you have for them in the current time of crisis?
Yeah, I would say two things. I already mentioned one, which is to notice changes in market demand. And then the other is to be able to adapt, right? So I see a lot of businesses that are defined as, I'm in this business, and they define the business as the product or service they're in, right? Mm-hmm. As opposed to the customer problem that's being addressed. So I'll give you an example. Here in Seattle, we have a lot of restaurants, or we used to, right? Most of those have closed down because it's been illegal to go for a long time, and they couldn't stay open long enough. There's a few that have survived, and one in particular, they're probably the most famous restaurant in Seattle, by far the most expensive. And it's very, very fine elite dining, where it's $200 to $1,000 per person, US dollars, for one dinner for one person, right? Very, very expensive. And they've adapted. They said, we're not in the business of fine dining, right? Which is the category name that industry is called, fine dining, kind of elite dining. We're in the people are hungry business, right? So fine dining sales have declined 99% because it's illegal, right? But the demand to satisfy one's need of hunger has not changed globally, has not changed in Seattle. So he has started a grocery delivery business. He has started food delivery. He started alcohol delivery. He has a coffee station in his parking lot because the parking lot's not illegal. The dining room is, the parking lot isn't. He's selling boxed lunches. And this will be the equivalent of McKinsey starting like McDonald's, right? It's such a big contrast. But where's the market demand? People are still hungry. They still need to eat. And some of them want to eat good food, but the traditional method of delivery is no longer viable, right? So that's an example of the CEO being very flexible on what business are they really, really in. And those who said, we are in this very narrowly defined category called fine dining, they've all disappeared. So for large companies, really recognizing and fully appreciating from the customer's point of view, what customer demand are you actually really serving, and being more flexible in the how, and being adaptable on different ways of delivering and serving that core underlying customer demand. That would be very useful for them.
Got it. Okay. In the post-pandemic world, we, as we were discussing, we expect most of the companies to go digital. If you look at it from the impact on a consulting business or the impact on a consultant, how do you think a consultant should rewire themselves in this new realm of digitization or digitalization? Yeah,
so a simple way to answer that question is to always look at customer demand, right? So From a consulting standpoint, what are your clients doing? From the client standpoint, what are their customers doing, right? And then consulting is just a downstream implication of changes in sort of your client's customer demand, the demand of clients themselves for your services, and then ultimately your own business. Right? So that's probably the most obvious one, which is probably pretty apparent for everyone, is just the method of communication, right? We're now in a digital world. Most of us are working from home or in very, very small groups. And so being more adept, at this medium is very useful. It's when I was on a group conference call or a Zoom conference call yesterday with 16 people, and I noticed that automatically everyone on the call had muted themselves except the speaker. I'm like, oh, this is really good video conference discipline. This is impressive, right? And back in March, everyone had their speakers on. Everyone could hear all the noise, especially my kids when they were in class with their teachers, and it was just a bit chaotic. So mastering the medium, I think, is probably one big change. And I think there will be, and this has already been true, but a move towards having more data available, right? So if you can't see your customers physically, you got to rely more on data. So you see things like data analysis, data scientists, big data, business intelligence. Those fields have been very popular the last 20 years, and I think they will continue to be incrementally more. And then from a consultant standpoint, just the tools are going to be a little different. So one of the things I've been counseling people on in preparing for the case interview during the pandemic is to become accustomed to the medium. So I'll give you two very simple examples. One is right now, Rahul, on my screen, you are right here, right? Now, in real life, I would make eye contact with your eyes, which means I would be looking right here to be respectful and polite and emotionally engaged and connect with you. And I see that you're smiling. I would notice that. But we're not in person, right? We're on Zoom, live streaming to a couple thousand people. And right now, if I look at you as I perceive it, I'm ignoring the 7,000 people on the camera above me. So this whole time, I've been ignoring your face, so no disrespect. I've been looking at this little green light, right? And trying to be very engaged with a green light, right? Which is a very odd, sort of emotional experience for me, but it's what translates on Zoom. So I'm making eye contact with this green light because that's where my camera is, okay? That's like one difference. And I have to be very conscious of that and intentional because my instinct is to pay attention to your face. Okay? So that's one example. Yeah. Another one, is I now have a clipboard very handy next to my computer. So if I'm doing a case interview or I'm explaining an idea to a client, or sometimes if I teach my kids something, if they're at their mother's house, I will draw things out like with a marker. Whereas normally you might have a whiteboard to use or a piece of paper in front of you on a desk. Now I encourage everyone who's doing case interviews, in case you have a last minute Zoom formatted interview, to practice writing and so people can see, so you can still see. So if I have 3 ideas I want to convey, right, 3 parts of a case, I have to practice. Can you see that? If I hold it here, does it have to be up to there? Do I have to shift it over so you can see? Is my handwriting legible enough that it comes across on a camera? And all of that you want to practice because it just adds friction to the process, right? And if an interviewer or a client sort of is not enjoying the experience, but they're not totally sure why, and it's because of all these little things that they add up. So I think just from an EQ, emotional intelligence, interpersonal skills standpoint, little nuances and practicing those, I think can be helpful either in the consultant role or in the case interview role.
Correct. Very useful. I think just one last question, Victor. So again, going back to the point that, you successfully cracked 60 out of 61 interviews. If you don't mind telling us, which was that one interview that you didn't convert, and any key learning from that, you might have covered in your videos, or you just want to call out that, this was one reason because of which maybe I would have hit that 100% mark.
Okay, so you're the first person to ever ask me that question. It's a very
I tried reading about it. Yeah. I tried to find that before this, but I couldn't.
And it's not out there because I never shared it. So here it is on Zoom and YouTube. BCG. I did not make it past. Yeah, I did not make it past first round interviews with Boston Consulting Group. It was an estimation question. To this day, I still don't know what I did wrong. I have a suspicion it was an interpersonal miscalculation on my part. I don't think it was the case. I think it was interpersonal. So, but I will never know why.
Yeah, and looking at your videos, I was able to crack the BCG interview, and now I'm here for a considerable time. Yeah.
So despite my rejection, I did okay. So.
Yeah, correct. That was our last question, Victor. And, we have reached the end of this interview. I especially loved your advice around, how in a resume you should balance the IQ, EQ, and the hard skills and soft skills. I think that perspective adds another dimension to one's thinking when they are thinking about this, which is quite enriching. Thanks a lot. Thank you so much for taking out time from your schedule to chat with us.
You're quite welcome. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
I would also like to thank and congratulate the Techfest team on organizing this event. It's commendable that despite the current pandemic, the team has ensured continuity of such amazing events. I wish you guys all the best in your future endeavors. Once again, thank you all and have a good night.